Lisbon, 1930s. A corpse tumbles from the highest terrace, cane clutched like a lie. Hercule Poirot steps onto 7 shadowed gardens where every lantern hides a traitor. One widow in verbena, one heiress in violet, one doctor with poison in his smile. A silver wolf's head cane splits open to reveal a dying man's last secret. 2 murders, 1 fraud, 0 accidents. In the city of 7 hills, the little gray cells climb higher than the storm. Murder on the shadowed terraces of Lisbon. Order is the deadliest weapon. Chapter 1. The invitation to the Miraduro Hercule Poirot, having concluded a wearisome little matter concerning a diamond necklace and a lady of title in Biarritz, had permitted himself the indulgence of a fortnight in Lisbon. The city, with its 7 hills and its air of faded grandeur, appealed to the symmetry of his mind. The streets climbed and descended with the neatness of a well-constructed puzzle. He had taken rooms at the Avenida Palace, where the porter addressed him as Meu Coronel, and the chambermaid arranged his dressing table with the precision of a military review. It was on the 3rd morning, as he sat at breakfast dissecting a papaya with the fastidiousness of a surgeon, that the note was brought to him. The envelope was of heavy, cream-laid paper, the flap sealed with violet wax impressed by a signet he did not recognize. A dolphin entwined about an anchor. Within, a single sheet folded once. Miraduro das Portas do Sol. This evening at sunset. Come alone. A death is being arranged, and only the little gray cells may prevent it. The handwriting sloped elegantly to the right, the ink a deep violet that matched the wax. There was no signature, only a faint perfume that rose from the paper. Verbena, sharp and green, with an undernote of something medicinal. Poirot laid the note beside his coffee cup and considered it with the gravity he brought to all anonymous communications. In his experience, such missives fell into 3 categories: the work of lunatics, the work of journalists, and, very occasionally, the work of murderers. The phrase, "a death is being arranged," possessed a chilling exactitude. It was not the language of hysteria, but of calculation. He finished his coffee, dabbed his mustaches with the napkin, and summoned the concierge. This envelope, was it delivered by hand? By a boy from the Alfama, senor. Barefoot, with a face like a sad cherub. He vanished before I could question him. Poirot nodded. The Alfama, the oldest quarter, a labyrinth of alleys where the Moorish past lingered in the very stones. A district admirably suited to anonymity. At 4 o'clock, he set out. The funicular from the Baixa creaked upwards like an elderly lift in a provincial hotel, depositing him at the Largo das Portas do Sol. The Miraduro was a wide terrace suspended above the tiled roofs of the city. Beyond, the Tagus lay broad and glittering, touched to molten copper by the westering sun. A solitary jacaranda shed its purple blossoms across the paving. They lay in damp clumps, bruised and fragrant. Poirot chose a bench beneath the tree and waited with the patience of a cat at a mouse hole. The light faded. The sky turned the color of a pigeon's breast. A clock in the Say struck 6. She came from the direction of the church of São Vicente, moving with the unhurried grace of one who is accustomed to being watched. Mourning became her. The black lace mantilla framed a face of pale olive, the eyes dark and lustrous beneath straight brows. A single camellia was pinned at her throat, its whiteness startling against the lace. "Senor Poirot?" Her voice was low, the Portuguese vowels soft, yet each consonant precise. "I am Dona Inés de Castro." The name struck him like a small, cold bell. De Castro, an old family. Diminished now, yet still possessing cork forests in the Alentejo, and a palace on the Rua do Alecrim that had once housed a viceroy. He rose and bowed. "Madame, your note intrigued me, though I confess a preference for introductions less dramatic." A flicker of amusement touched her mouth. "In Lisbon we are dramatic by habit. It is the fault of the light." She seated herself beside him, arranging the folds of her skirt with care. "My husband, Dom Vasco de Castro, was found at dawn yesterday at the foot of these steps. His skull was broken. The police speak of misadventure, a gentleman who had taken too much wine, a slip upon the wet stones." Poirot's gaze traveled to the flight of steps that descended from the terrace into shadow. They were steep, the treads narrow, the surface polished by centuries of feet. A man might indeed fall. Yet, "And you, madame, do not accept this verdict?" "I accept nothing that is convenient." She opened a small reticule of black jet and drew forth a photograph. "See for yourself." The picture was sharp, taken in the hard light of early morning. Dom Vasco lay on his back, one leg twisted beneath him, the other outstretched. His evening clothes were scarcely disarranged. The white tie remained impeccably knotted. In his right hand he clutched an ebony cane with a silver wolf's head handle. There was no blood upon the stones. Poirot studied the position of the body, the angle of the cane, the absence of disturbance in the dust beside the corpse. He slipped a small magnifying lens from his pocket and bent closer. "The cane," he murmured. "It is held with the ferrule towards the wrist, not the ground. Curious. And the left shoe, the sole is unmarked. Yet these steps are treacherous. One would expect scuffing." Dona Inés watched him with the fixity of a painter observing a subject. "There is more. Tonight, at the Terraces da Graça, the highest garden in Lisbon, my husband's partners assemble to divide what remains of his estate. One of them quarreled with him bitterly over money. One of them will strike again unless Hercule Poirot intervenes. He returned the photograph, and the arrangement of which you wrote." She leaned closer. The verbena was stronger now, mingled with the warmth of her skin. "Dom Vasco was not killed here. He was killed elsewhere and brought to this place. The arrangement is the second death, the one that will make the first seem accident. Tonight, on the terraces, the murderer will complete his design." Poirot considered. The light had almost gone. The first stars pricked the indigo above the river. A tram rattled somewhere below, its bell mournful. "You have omitted one detail, madame. Why should the murderer repeat his crime in the presence of Hercule Poirot?" Her smile was sudden, brilliant, and quite without warmth. "Because, monsieur, you are the perfect witness. Who would suspect a crime committed beneath the nose of the famous detective?" She rose, the camellia trembling at her throat. "The Terraces da Graça. 9 o'clock. The gatekeeper will admit you." She placed a small card in his hand, thick ivory engraved with a single line. "Terraces da Graça, Rua da Voz do Operário." Then she was gone, melting into the shadows of the jacaranda as silently as she had come. Poirot remained upon the bench long after the scent of verbena had dispersed. He turned the card over in his fingers, noting the quality of the engraving, the faint indentation where a thumb had pressed. At last he stood, adjusted the angle of his Homburg, and descended the funicular into the glowing city. In his room at the Avenida Palace, he laid out his evening clothes with care. The white waistcoat with the discreet pearl studs, the black tie of watered silk, the patent leather shoes that reflected the ceiling like twin mirrors. As he dressed, he addressed his reflection. "Hercule Poirot, my friend, you are about to walk into a trap. But then, the trap that is recognized in advance ceases to be a trap and becomes merely an arrangement." He smiled, twirled his mustaches to their finest points, and went down to meet the Lisbon night. Chapter 2. The Company Assembles. The taxi deposited Hercule Poirot at the foot of the Rua da Voz do Operario precisely at 8:45. The street climbed steeply between walls overhung with jasmine and the occasional balcony where a canary in a wicker cage practiced its scales. Above him, the Terraces da Grassa rose in 7 distinct levels, each illuminated by lanterns of pierced tin that swung from the branches of pomegranate and pepper trees. The effect was that of a Moorish palace translated into a hanging garden. The air carried the sweetness of orange blossom mingled with the sharper note of resin from the torches. A gate of wrought iron, black and gold, stood open. Beyond it, a flight of shallow steps led upward between borders of agapanthus and myrtle. Poirot mounted with the measured tread of a man who disliked unnecessary exertion. At the first landing, a major domo in the crimson livery of the De Castro household awaited him, a lantern in one hand and a silver tray in the other. "Señor Poirot, the señora expects you." The man's voice was deferential, yet his eyes flicked once, assessingly, over the Belgian's immaculate evening dress. "If the señor will leave his card?" Poirot produced one from a thin morocco case. The major domo bowed and preceded him up the next flight. They passed a fountain where water trickled from the mouth of a bronze dolphin into a basin of blue and white azulejos. The sound was cool and continuous, like the ticking of an expensive clock. The second terrace opened into a sala paved with black and white marble in a chessboard pattern. French doors stood wide to the night. Within, a chandelier of Waterford crystal blazed above a table laid for supper. But the company had not yet assembled there. Instead, they stood in small knots upon the terrace itself, silhouetted against the city lights that spread below like a carpet of topaz and diamond. Dona Inés received him at the head of the steps. She had exchanged mourning for a gown of deep violet silk that left her arms bare. A single string of amethysts gleamed at her throat. The camellia was gone, replaced by a spray of stephanotis, whose fragrance warred with the verbena that still clung to her skin. "You are punctual, monsieur. In Portugal we admire the virtue, though we seldom practice it." She laid her gloved fingers upon his sleeve. "Come, I present the vultures." She led him first to a tall Englishman, whose dinner jacket strained across shoulders that had once, perhaps, been athletic. The man's face was florid, the nose threaded with tiny veins, his eyes pale blue and slightly bloodshot, fixed upon Poirot with the wariness of a gambler measuring a new opponent at the table. "Mr. Reginald Blaine," said Dona Inés, "my husband's partner in the cork venture. Reginald, this is Hercule Poirot." Blaine's handshake was brief and damp. "Heard of you, of course. Solved that business on the Simplon, didn't you? Clever." The word carried no enthusiasm. "Though I dare say Lisbon's a quieter sort of place. No call for that sort of thing here." Poirot inclined his head. "One never knows, monsieur. Death is the most cosmopolitan of travelers." Blaine gave a short laugh that might have been nervousness, and turned away to refill his glass from a decanter of port that stood upon a marble console. Next, a thin man in correct evening dress, the coat a shade too somber, the tie knotted with surgical precision. His hair was black and sleek, his eyes behind pince-nez the color of river silt. "Dr. Antonio Ferreira," murmured Dona Inés, "physician to the family these 20 years. The doctor bowed. "An honor, monsieur, though I confess I had not expected to meet the continent's most distinguished detective at a reading of a will. Nor had I expected to attend one," replied Poirot urbanely. "Yet here we are, n'est-ce pas?" Dr. Ferreira's smile was thin. Dom Vasco's heart was not strong. I warned him repeatedly. Excitement, rich food, the stairs of this house, fatal combination. "Yet he died upon the public street," observed Poirot. "A tragedy," said the doctor, and moved away with the silent tread of a hospital sister. A woman detached herself from the shadow of a camellia tree. She was tall, angular, dressed in bottle green silk that did nothing for a complexion the color of old parchment. Her hair, once fair, was now the shade of straw left too long in the rain. It was pinned with a comb of carved jade. Her hands, Poirot noted, were stained at the fingertips with chlorophyll. "Miss Honoria Blaine," said Dona Inés, a faint edge to her voice. "Reginald's sister. She has made a study of the flora of the terraces." "Botany is a more honest science than criminology, Mr. Poirot," declared Miss Blaine, in a voice that carried the clipped authority of the lecture hall. "Plants do not lie. They poison cleanly, or they heal. Men dissemble." Poirot bowed. "Yet both may be cultivated to deadly purpose, mademoiselle." She gave a short bark of laughter and returned to her contemplation of a night-blooming Sirius that was just unfurling its waxy petals. A military figure clicked heels beside them. Capitão Henrique Silva, retired from the Portuguese Navy, his chest ablaze with miniature medals. His mustache was waxed to such rigid points that it seemed to enter the room before the rest of him. His eyes were black, bright, and perpetually in motion. "Enchanté," he snapped, though enchantment seemed the last emotion he felt. "Dom Vasco promised me a fleet to survey the Azores. Instead, I receive a handful of promissory notes. The law of the sea is clear. A promise broken is a debt unpaid." "Patience, Capitão," said Dona Inés smoothly. "The notary arrives within the hour." The last member of the party stood a little apart, beneath a pergola heavy with wisteria. She was young, perhaps 19, with the slender grace of a fawn. Her gown was white, high-waisted, the sleeves puffed in the fashion of a decade earlier. A violet ribbon bound her dark hair. She did not approach, but when Poirot's gaze met hers, she inclined her head with the grave courtesy of a child presented at court. "Dona Leonor de Castro," said Dona Inés, "my husband's ward. The shipping line passes to her on certain conditions." The girl's eyes, violet like her ribbon, held Poirot's for a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned away, her fingers pleasuring the wisteria petals as though they were rosary beads. At 9 o'clock, precisely, the notary arrived, a small, desiccated man with a voice like the rustle of parchment. He carried a dispatch case of green morocco and a look of professional melancholy. The company moved indoors to a long table of jacaranda wood, where silver-branched candelabra flickered above a centerpiece of orchids and ferns. The will was brief and, to most of those present, brutal. To Mr. Blaine, a legacy of 5,000 escudos, in consideration of past services. To Dr. Ferreira, a similar sum, and the medical journals in the library. To Capitan Silva, the charts and instruments in the study. To Miss Blaine, the contents of the greenhouse. To Dona Inés, the cork forests in the Alentejo, and the palace on the Rua do Alecrim. To Dona Leonor, the entire shipping line, on condition that she marry within the year, the husband to be approved by the executors. A silence followed the reading, broken only by the splutter of a candle. Reginald Blaine's glass struck the table with a crack that set the crystal singing. 5,000, he exploded. After 20 years of keeping that fool afloat, I'll contest it. You will not, said the notary mildly. The codicil is witnessed by the Belgian consul and the archbishop's secretary. It is iron. Dr. Ferreira removed his pince-nez and polished them slowly. Dom Vasco was always quixotic. Capitan Silva's hand strayed to the dress sword at his hip, an anachronism permitted to retired officers. He promised me a fleet, he repeated, as though the words were a charm. Miss Blaine laughed again, that sharp icicle sound. At least my legacy will not bankrupt me, though I dare say the datura will interest the police when they learn how freely it grows here. Dona Leonor said nothing at all. She sat very straight, her hands folded in her lap, the violet ribbon trembling slightly as she breathed. Dona Inés rose. Supper is served. We may as well eat what my husband can no longer enjoy. The meal was exquisite. Consommé of quail, sole grilled with almonds, a saddle of kid with rosemary, and for dessert a pudding of egg yolks and cinnamon that dissolved on the tongue like a sigh. The wines were from the Douro, the conversation desultory and edged. Poirot, seated between Dona Inés and the silent Leonor, observed the play of candlelight upon faces and the small, revealing gestures. Blaine's repeated loosening of his collar, Dr. Ferreira's habit of counting the courses aloud under his breath, Capitan Silva's trick of aligning his knife and fork with geometric precision. At 11, the sky, which had been clear, suddenly bruised with cloud. A wind sprang up from the river, rattling the palms. The major domo appeared to announce that the funicular had ceased running for the night. Carriages would be summoned. But before anyone could move, a scream, high, animal, cut off as though by a hand across the mouth, shivered through the open windows. Poirot was on his feet first. He crossed the sala in half a dozen rapid strides and stepped onto the terrace. The lanterns still swung, but their light now seemed feeble against the darkness. Rain had begun to fall in heavy, isolated drops that hissed upon the tiles. "Upwards," said Dona Inés at his elbow. The sound came from the top terrace. They climbed together, the others straggling behind. The steps were slippery. Miss Blaine stumbled and swore with scientific fluency. At the highest level, a door stood ajar, the door to Dom Vasco's private study. Moonlight, breaking through a rift in the clouds, striped the floor with silver bars. On the desk lay the ebony cane from the photograph, its silver wolf's head handle dark with something that gleamed wetly. And at the foot of the wall that overlooked the city, 30 feet above the next terrace, lay the body of Reginald Blaine. His skull was split. Beside him, a broken pot of Miss Blaine's datura sanguinea spilled its crimson trumpets across the stones like a libation. Poirot knelt, heedless of the rain. The earth within the pot was dry. The body lay upon a patch of wet tile. Someone had carried the datura from the greenhouse and smashed it after the fall. He straightened, his eyes glittering like the wet cobblestones. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. The arrangement proceeds exactly as planned. Chapter 3. The Second Fall. The rain, which had begun as a few sullen drops, now descended in earnest, a tropical downpour that turned the terraces into black mirrors and drummed upon the azulejos like impatient fingers upon a table. The company stood in a half-circle about the body, their shadows leaping grotesquely in the lantern light. Reginald Blaine lay on his back, one arm flung wide as though in appeal to the indifferent heavens. The other was bent beneath him at an angle no living joint could tolerate. The datura pot had shattered cleanly in two, the crimson flowers crushed into the wound so that blood and sap mingled in a sticky paste. Poirot, coat collar turned up, handkerchief pressed to his nose against the metallic smell, bent once more to examine the corpse. The skull was fractured above the left ear. The blow had been delivered with considerable force, yet the skin was scarcely broken. A heavy, blunt instrument, then, rather than a sharp one. He noted the position of the feet. The patent leather shoes pointed toward the wall, the toes barely touching the low parapet from which the man must have fallen. Curious. A man tumbling backward would sprawl with limbs akimbo. This body lay almost tidily, as though arranged for a photographer. "Capitaine Silva," said Poirot without looking up, "you are a man of action. Oblige me by stationing yourself at the foot of these stairs. No one is to leave the upper terraces until I give permission." The Capitaine hesitated, rain dripping from the points of his mustache. "This is a private house, monsieur." "And now it is a private morgue," retorted Poirot. "You wish the assassin to escape in the storm? Do as I say." Silva clicked his heels and departed, his sword-stick tapping a martial rhythm on the wet stones. Dr. Ferreira knelt opposite Poirot, his pince-nez misted. "Instantaneous," he pronounced after a brief examination of the eyes. "The cervical vertebrae are displaced. Death would have been immediate." He rose, wiping his fingers upon a cambric handkerchief already spotted with rain. "A tragic accident. The tiles are lethal when wet." "Accident?" Miss Blaine's voice cracked like a whip. "My datura does not leap from the greenhouse and brain Englishmen of its own accord. Someone carried it here." "Exactly, mademoiselle." Poirot straightened, his small frame rigid with authority. "And that someone wished us to believe you the culprit. The pot is from your collection. Your label is still attached. Yet the earth within is bone dry, while the terrace is awash. The plant was brought after the fall, not before." Donna Inez, sheltering beneath a silk parasol held by the major domo, spoke for the first time since the scream. "Then Reginald was murdered twice, once by the push, once by the plant." "Précisément, madame. The first death to kill the man, the second to direct suspicion. A mind both cunning and theatrical." Donna Leonore, who had remained at the rear of the group, stepped forward. Rain had darkened her white gown to the color of candle smoke. The violet ribbon clung to her hair like a bruise. She knelt beside the body with no regard for the mud, and touched Blaine's cheek with tentative fingers. "He was unkind," she said softly, "but he did not deserve this." A tear, or perhaps a raindrop, slid down her cheek. "Who screamed?" "A pertinent question," said Poirot. "The scream brought us here, yet the body is cold. See, the blood has ceased to flow. Mr. Blaine has been dead these 20 minutes at least. The scream was timed to coincide with our discovery. Dr. Ferreira gave a thin smile. You suggest a conspiracy, monsieur? That is, melodramatic. I suggest only what the facts dictate, docteur, and the facts are obstinate. The major domo cleared his throat. Begging your pardon, senores, but the Goan valet, José, he is missing. He served the port at supper and has not been seen since. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, the valet. He was devoted to Dom Vasco, I think? Like a dog, said Dona Inés. He came with my husband from Macau 20 years ago. He would not harm a guest. Yet guests have been harmed, observed Poirot. Conduct us to the greenhouse, if you please. They descended 2 levels to a glass structure wedged between retaining walls of mossy stone. The door was unlocked. Within, the air was humid and heavy with the scent of earth and orchids. Rows of clay pots marched along wooden benches, daturas, angels' trumpets, night-blooming cereus, and stranger things whose labels Poirot could not read. One space upon the nearest bench was empty, the soil beneath it undisturbed. Miss Blaine, said Poirot, your inventory is meticulous. Is this the missing pot? She examined the label still attached to a shard of terracotta. Yes, Datura sanguinea, collected in the Andes, 1923, the only specimen. Her voice shook with rage or grief. It was difficult to tell which. Poirot moved along the bench. A pair of gardener's gloves lay discarded beside a tray of seedlings. The fingers were stained with fresh earth. He lifted them delicately. These are too large for your hands, mademoiselle, and too small for the major domo. Whose, then? Dona Inés answered. José's. He tends the orchids when Miss Blaine is indisposed. They searched the greenhouse and the adjacent potting shed, but found no trace of the valet. Only a single footprint in the soft earth outside the door, narrow, bare, the print of a man who had fled into the storm. Returning to the upper terrace, Poirot paused at the study door. The ebony cane still lay upon the desk, the blood on its handle now congealed to a dull brown. He lifted it carefully, wrapping it in his handkerchief. Observe, he said, holding it to the light. The ferrule is missing, yet in the photograph of Dom Vasco's body, the cane was intact. Either there are 2 canes, or the same cane has been used for 2 murders. Capitan Silva, who had rejoined them, gave a snort. Dom Vasco's cane was unique, ebony from Macau, silver head carved in Goa. There was only one. Then we have a problem most interesting, said Poirot, for the ferrule is gone, and with it, perhaps, the solution. The storm reached its height. Thunder rolled above the city like artillery. Lightning illuminated the terraces in magnesium flashes. In one such flash, Poirot saw upon the parapet directly above Blaine's body a scrape of mud, no broader than a coin. He climbed the 3 shallow steps to the wall and examined it closely. The scrape was fresh, the mud still wet. Beside it, caught upon a splinter of stone, fluttered a scrap of black lace. He plucked it free and held it to his nose. Verbena, sharp and unmistakable. Dona Inés, watching from below, went very still. Madame, called Poirot, this lace is from your mantilla, I think. You were upon the wall? I was not, she replied steadily. I have been with you since the scream. Yet the lace does not lie, and the scent, verbena, is yours alone. Dr. Ferreira interposed smoothly. The wind is strong, monsieur. Lace tears easily. It might have blown from anywhere. From a mantilla worn indoors at supper? Poirot's tone was gentle, but his eyes were not. No, doctor. Someone stood upon this wall after the rain began, and that someone wore verbena. The major domo appeared, drenched and apologetic. The carriages are at the lower gate, senora. The funicular is flooded. Dona Inés drew a long breath. Then we are prisoners of the storm. The guest rooms are prepared. We shall continue this inquisition at dawn. They descended in single file, the lanterns guttering in the wind. Poirot brought up the rear, the lace scrap tucked into his waistcoat pocket, the cane wrapped in his handkerchief. At the second terrace he paused, shining his pocket torch upon the tiles. A faint smear of blood led from the study door to the parapet, a trail no rain had yet washed away. It ended at the exact spot where the lace had been found. He stood a moment in the downpour, the city lights blurred below him into a watery impressionist painting. 2 men dead within 24 hours, both connected by a cane that was no longer whole. A valet vanished, a pot of poison planted, a scrap of lace scented like a confession, and somewhere in the darkness, a mind that arranged deaths as neatly as a florist arranges blooms. Poirot shivered, though not from cold. "The little gray cells," he murmured to the storm. "They must work quickly, for the arrangement is not yet complete." Chapter 4. The little gray cells at work. The storm broke before first light, leaving the terraces washed clean and the air sharp with the scent of wet stone and bruised jacaranda. At 7:30, the company assembled in the sala of the Casa dos Bicos, a room whose diamond-faceted facade glittered in the pale morning sun like the scales of some prehistoric beast. The table had been cleared of last night's supper. In its place stood a silver coffee service and a basket of warm pasté de nata, their custard hearts still trembling. No one ate. Poirot entered last, immaculate in dove gray, the ebony cane, now cleaned of blood, resting across his forearms like a relic. He placed it carefully upon the table and surveyed the circle of faces. Dona Inés, pale but composed in black silk, Dr. Ferreira polishing his pince-nez with mechanical precision, Capitan Silva rigid as a flagstaff, Miss Blaine in a severe tweed skirt, her fingers drumming a silent tattoo, Dona Leonor, white-faced, the violet ribbon replaced by a plain black one. The major domo hovered at the door, eyes lowered. "Mesdames, messieurs," Poirot began, "we have 2 deaths, 1 disappearance, and a cane that has lost its ferrule. Let us proceed with order and method." He lifted the cane. "This belonged to Dom Vasco. Capitan Silva assures us it is unique, yet in the photograph taken at the Portas do Sol, the ferrule is present. Last night it was not. Conclusion, the cane was removed from the first scene, used upon Mr. Blaine, and returned to the study. The murderer is someone with access to both places." Dr. Ferreira gave a dry cough. "The valet, José, he had keys to every door." "True, but José has vanished, and the dead do not run barefoot through Lisbon in a storm. No, the valet is either accomplice or victim. Let us examine the deaths separately." He turned to Dona Inés. "Madame, you believe your husband was murdered, yet the police report states he fell while intoxicated. You showed me the photograph. The body lies upon the lower steps of the Portas do Sol, yet the cane is clutched ferrule upward. A man falling forward would drop the cane. A man falling backward would not clutch it thus. The body was placed." Dona Inés inclined her head. "I have said so from the first. Yet you did not summon the police. You summoned Hercule Poirot. Why? She met his gaze steadily. Because the police are satisfied with accidents. You are not. Flattering. Now, Mr. Blaine. He falls, or is pushed, from the top terrace. The datura pot is smashed upon his head after death. The earth is dry. Someone wishes us to suspect Miss Blaine. Miss Blaine snorted. I should, Coco. My datura is valuable. I do not waste it on Englishmen. Poirot ignored the interruption. The scream that brought us to the body was timed. The blood trail from study to parapet shows the murderer dragged Mr. Blaine after striking him indoors. Why indoors? Because the study contains the cane, the perfect weapon, and because the study has a door to the service stairs used by the valet. Capitan Silva stirred. The service stairs are locked at night. Locked, yes, but who holds the key? Poirot produced a small Yale key from his pocket. Ely. This was found beneath the desk this morning. It fits the service door. The major domo informs me only 3 such keys exist. 1 for the master of the house, 1 for the valet, 1 for Madame. Donna Inez's fingers tightened upon her coffee cup. I have never seen that key. Yet it was in your husband's desk. Curious. Poirot laid the key beside the cane. Now, the lace, black lace, scented with verbena, caught upon the parapet. Madame, your mantilla is torn. The missing piece matches exactly. I was in the sala when the scream came. True, but you were absent for 7 minutes before supper, ostensibly to fetch a shawl. 7 minutes is sufficient to climb the service stairs, strike Mr. Blaine, who had perhaps gone to the study to search for documents, and return. Dr. Ferreira leaned forward. This is conjecture. You have no proof. I have facts, said Poirot mildly. Fact 1. Dom Vasco discovered fraud in the Cork accounts. Mr. Blaine was cooking the books. Fact 2. The shipping line is mortgaged to a phantom company in Madeira. Capitan Silva signed the false surveys. Fact 3. 3 death certificates signed by Dr. Ferreira in the past year are irregular. The deceased were elderly, wealthy, and childless. Their estates benefited the De Castro holdings. Silence, thick as the coffee dregs, settled over the table. Miss Blaine broke it. And my brother? What had he to gain by killing Dom Vasco? Nothing. He was killed to silence him. He knew too much and threatened exposure unless paid. The murderer struck first at Dom Vasco to seize control, then at Mr. Blaine to prevent scandal. Donna Leonor spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. And me? The will says I must marry within the year. Who chooses my husband? The executors, said Poirot. Who are Dr. Ferreira and Capitan Silva? Convenient. The Capitan's hand went to his swordstick. You accuse officers of honor? I accuse no one. Yet, I state possibilities. The fraud is a pyramid. At the apex sits the one who benefits most. Poirot's gaze swept the table and settled upon Donna Inez. The Cork forests are unmortgaged. They are worth a fortune. And the palace on the Rua do Alecrim contains a safe whose combination only the master and mistress knew. Donna Inez set down her cup with a click. You suggest I killed my husband for money? I, who loved him. Love and money are not incompatible, madame, but let us test a theory. He turned to the major domo. Summon the police photographer who took the picture of Dom Vasco, and bring José's room key. While they waited, Poirot paced the sala, hands clasped behind his back. The others watched him as though he were a clockwork toy wound too tight. At length, the photographer arrived, a thin youth with a Leica and the expression of one perpetually surprised. Poirot showed him the cane. This is the weapon from last night? The youth examined it. "No, senor. The cane in my photograph had a longer ferrule, silver, with a wolf's head. This ferrule is shorter, brass beneath the silver plate. See the wear." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then we have two canes, or one cane altered. The ferrule was removed after the first photograph and replaced with a substitute before the second murder." Dr. Ferreira frowned. "Why?" "To create confusion. The murderer wished us to believe the same weapon was used twice, but the original ferrule, where is it?" At that moment, the major domo returned, bearing a small key and a look of distress. "José's room, senor. It has been ransacked, the mattress slashed, drawers emptied, and this—" He placed upon the table a silver ferrule, the wolf's head beautifully chased, hollow inside. Poirot pounced upon it. "Ah, the missing piece, and hollow. Why?" He peered within, then tapped it against the table. A faint click. From the hollow interior slid a roll of stiff paper, no longer than a cigarette. He unrolled it carefully. Upon it, in Dom Vasco's spidery hand, was written, "If I die, look to the cork ledgers. The Madeira Company is a lie. Inez knows. Trust Leonor." The silence now was absolute. Donna Inez rose slowly. "That is a forgery." "Perhaps," said Poirot, "but the combination to the safe will tell us. Madame, the numbers?" She hesitated, then recited them with icy calm. 9, 6, 8, 3. The major domo was dispatched. He returned with a ledger bound in green leather and a bundle of documents tied with red tape. Poirot opened the ledger. Page after page of figures, neatly entered, yet with marginal notes in a different hand. Donna Inez's hand, he recognized the flourish of the R. The notes corrected the entries upward, doubling, tripling the apparent profits. And the Madeira Company. Poirot untied the bundle. Share certificates, bearer bonds, all made out to a firm styled Compañía Marítima Atlántica. The directors, Dr. Antonio Ferreira, Capitão Enrique Silva, and Inez de Castro. Poirot closed the ledger. "Madame, you did not kill for money. You killed to conceal fraud on a grand scale. Your husband discovered it and threatened exposure. You drugged him, datura in his port, perhaps, and pushed him from a low wall in the Alfama. José, devoted José, helped you carry the body to the Portas do Sol to simulate accident. But Mr. Blaine demanded his share of the spoils. Last night you lured him to the study, struck him with the cane, dragged him to the parapet, and planted the datura to incriminate Miss Blaine." Donna Inez laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Prove it." "The lace," said Poirot, "the verbena, the key beneath the desk, placed there by José before he fled, perhaps in remorse, and the note in the ferrule. Your husband's dying message, hidden by the valet until he could deliver it safely." He turned to Capitão Silva. "You, Capitão, will arrest Madame. The police wait below." Silva hesitated, then drew his sword stick. The blade flashed. But before he could move, Miss Blaine seized the coffee pot and hurled its scalding contents into his face. He screamed, clawing at his eyes. Dr. Ferreira made a dash for the French windows, but Poirot was swifter. His cane tripped the doctor neatly, sending him sprawling. Donna Leonor stood trembling. "It is over?" "Not quite," said Poirot gently. "There is still the matter of José." As if in answer, a groan came from the terrace. They found the Goan valet beneath the jacaranda, bound and gagged, a bruise upon his temple. He had been waylaid while attempting to post the ferrule to Poirot at the Avenida Palace. The little detective surveyed the scene. The ledger, the ferrule, the unconscious conspirators, the storm-washed terraces gleaming in the morning light. "The little gray cells," he murmured. "They have prevailed, but order is not yet restored. There remains one final act." Chapter 5. The Verbena Clue. The police arrived at 10 o'clock, 2 inspectors from the Policia Judiciaria, and a sergeant whose mustache rivaled Poirot's own in magnificence. They removed Dona Inés, Dr. Ferreira, and Capitão Silva in separate vans, the latter still dabbing at his scalded face with a handkerchief that smelled of coffee and defeat. Miss Blaine watched the departure from the sala window, her expression unreadable. Dona Leonor had retired to her room with a migraine and a tray of tea. The major domo, pale but composed, supervised the locking of the study and the sealing of the greenhouse. Poirot remained upon the second terrace, seated upon a stone bench beneath a pergola of wisteria. The sun was high now. The city below shimmered in a heat haze, the Tagus a ribbon of beaten silver. He held the scrap of black lace between finger and thumb, turning it so that the light caught the delicate threading. Verbena, faint but unmistakable. He had requested that every guest surrender their handkerchiefs before the police arrived. The collection lay upon the bench beside him like a magician's silk scarves. From Dona Inés, lace edged with jet, scented strongly of verbena. From Dr. Ferreira, cambric, iodine, and carbolic. From Capitão Silva, naval linen, salt, and macassar oil. From Miss Blaine, silk printed with poisonous plants, no scent at all. From Dona Leonor, nothing. Her pockets had been empty. He rose and walked the length of the terrace, his eyes upon the tiles. The blood trail from the study had been washed away by the night's rain, but memory served. He paused at the foot of the service stairs, a narrow flight hidden behind a screen of bamboo. The door at the top was locked. The key found beneath the desk fitted it perfectly. He climbed, counting the steps, 23 to the study landing. A fit person could ascend in 30 seconds, descend in less. The study itself had been tidied by the police photographer, but the desk drawer remained open. Within lay a small glass phial, half full of a colorless liquid. Poirot uncorked it and sniffed. Bitter almonds, faint but definite. Prussic acid. He replaced the cork with care. Downstairs again, he summoned the major domo. The valet José, where was he found? Beneath the jacaranda on the third terrace, senor, bound with his own turban, gagged with a stocking. He says he was struck from behind while posting a letter at the gate. The letter? Addressed to you at the Avenida Palace. He had the ferulo in his pocket and the note inside. He feared to give it openly, thought Madame might intercept it. Poirot nodded. And the greenhouse key? There is only one. It hangs upon a nail in the potting shed. Anyone might take it. Anyone who knew its hiding place changes nightly, said Poirot. Who decided the hiding place? Miss Blaine. She is particular about security. Poirot found Miss Blaine in the greenhouse repotting a salvia with surgical precision. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, revealing arms corded with muscle. Mademoiselle, the key to this door. Where was it hidden last night? She did not look up. Beneath the third flower pot on the left bench, I moved it after supper. And who knew? Only myself and Leonor. She waters the orchids when I am indisposed. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Dona Leonor has a key to the greenhouse? No, but she knows the hiding places. She is an observant child. He thanked her and sought out Dona Leonor. She was in the library, a small room lined with atlases and logs of voyages to Macau and Timor. She sat at a tambour desk, writing in a ledger bound in blue morocco. "Mademoiselle, you knew the greenhouse key's location." She closed the ledger. "Yes, Miss Blaine trusts me with the plants. They are less complicated than people. You were in the sala when Mr. Blaine died?" "I was. I went to the powder room for a moment. My head ached. When I returned, the scream came." Poirot studied her. The violet eyes were steady, but the hand that held the pen trembled slightly. "You are 19, heir to a shipping line, and required to marry within the year. The executors are now in custody. What will you do?" She smiled, a small, sad curve. "Sail, perhaps. The Estrela do Mar leaves for Brazil next month. I have a cabin booked." "Alone?" "Captains do not need chaperones." She opened the ledger again. "My guardian taught me the accounts. I can manage." Poirot bowed and left her. In the corridor, he encountered the major domo carrying a tray of empty cups. "The Señora's verbena water," said the man, anticipating the question. "She bathes her temples with it when distressed. The bottle is in her dressing room." Poirot followed him upstairs. Dona Inez's apartments occupied the entire eastern wing. The dressing room was a bower of mirrors and satin. Upon the marquetry table stood a crystal flask stoppered with amethyst. Poirot lifted it. The scent was overwhelming. Verbena, yes, but laced with something sharper. He dabbed a drop upon his handkerchief and tucked it away. That afternoon, he walked the terraces alone. At the top level, he found a patch of soft earth where the datura pot had stood. Footprints, small, bare, the valet's, led to the parapet and stopped, but overlaid upon them, faint but detectable, were the marks of a woman's heel. Narrow, high, the impression of a court shoe. He followed them to the service stairs, down 2 flights, and into a small anteroom furnished with a chaise longue and a screen of carved ivory. Upon the chaise lay a black mantilla, the tear at the hem fresh. Beside it, a single white camellia, wilted but still fragrant. He picked up the mantilla. The missing lace matched the scrap in his pocket exactly. At dusk he gathered the remaining household in the sala, Miss Blaine, Dona Leonor, the major domo, and 2 maids who had been summoned as witnesses. He laid the mantilla upon the table. "This belonged to Dona Inez. The tear is new. The camellia was worn at her throat the night Dom Vasco died. Yet it was found here, 2 floors below the study." Miss Blaine examined the tear. Silk lace, handmade in Braga. Inez had a dozen such mantillas. "Precisely, but only one was worn that night, and only one carries the scent of verbena strong enough to linger." He produced his handkerchief. "I took a sample from her flask this afternoon. The chemist will confirm it matches the lace scrap." Dona Leonor spoke. "Then Inez killed them both?" "The evidence suggests it, but there is one detail that troubles me." He turned to the major domo. "You said Jose was posting a letter when attacked. Where is the post box?" "At the lower gate, senor, beside the funicular station." Poirot nodded. "Then Jose was struck after leaving the house. Someone followed him from the terraces, someone who knew he carried the ferrule." He paced to the window. The sun was setting, the sky a furnace of rose and gold. "Let us reconstruct. Dom Vasco discovers the fraud. He confronts his wife. She drugs him. Prussic acid in his port, perhaps, or datura in his coffee. He collapses in the Alfama, near the low wall behind the church of São Miguel. She and Jose carry the body to the Portas do Sol, arrange it with the cane. But José, devoted José, hides the ferrule with the note inside, intending to send it to the authorities. Inés discovers this. She waits until he leaves the house, follows him, strikes him down, and retrieves the ferrule. But she is interrupted, perhaps by a passer-by, and drops the lace in her flight. Miss Blaine frowned. And Blaine? Blaine demands money. Inés lures him to the study with promises of documents. She strikes him with the cane, the ferrule now removed to confuse the trail. She drags him to the parapet, plants the datura, and screams to bring us running. But she tears her mantilla in the struggle and leaves the camellia behind. Dona Leonor closed her ledger. Then it is finished. Poirot shook his head. Not quite. There is the matter of the Estrella du Mar. The ship sails at dawn, and someone has booked passage under the name of Leonor de Castro. The girl rose, white-faced. I told you, I am leaving. With the shipping line's reserve funds, the safe in the palace contains bearer bonds worth 500,000 escudos. They were removed last night. She stared at him, the violet eyes wide. I took nothing. Then who opened the safe? Only 3 people knew the combination: Dom Vasco, Dona Inés, and me, she finished quietly. My guardian taught me when I was 12. He said a captain must know where the treasure is kept. Poirot's smile was gentle. Exactly, mademoiselle. You are the captain now, and the treasure is yours by right. But someone else knew the combination, someone who watched you open the safe as a child. He turned to the door. José stood there, bandaged but steady, supported by a policeman. José, said Poirot, you hid the ferrule, but you also hid something else. The bonds? The valet nodded. In the greenhouse, beneath the orchid bench. I took them when Madame was arrested. I thought the little one would need them. Dona Leonor began to cry, silently, the tears sliding down her cheeks like rain upon porcelain. Poirot patted her shoulder. Courage, mademoiselle. The Estrella du Mar will sail, but with its proper captain, and Hercule Poirot will ensure the bonds are restored. Outside, the jacaranda blossoms drifted across the terraces, purple against the gold of evening. The city bells began to ring for vespers, their bronze voices rolling down the 7 hills to the river and the sea beyond. Chapter 6. The Reconstruction. The night chosen for the reconstruction was the 1st of November, All Saints' Day, when Lisbon's churches glowed with 1,000 candles, and the air carried the faint sweetness of chestnuts roasted over braziers in the Baixa. Hercule Poirot had requested that the terraces be lit exactly as they had been on the night of Reginald Blaine's death. The pierced tin lanterns swinging from pomegranate branches, the torches in iron sconces along the walls, the moon. Now 2 nights passed full, silvering the azulejos. The police had granted permission. The Casa dos Bicos was sealed save for the upper terraces, and 2 plainclothes officers stood discreetly at the lower gate. The company assembled at 9 o'clock in the sala. Dona Leonor in a simple black dress, the violet ribbon restored to her hair. Miss Blaine in tweed, a notebook in hand, the major domo with a tray of coffee. José, his head bandaged but his eyes bright with devotion, and under guard Dona Inés, Dr. Ferreira, and Capitão Silva. The prisoners wore handcuffs of polished steel that caught the candlelight like jewelry. Poirot, impeccable in evening dress, stood at the head of the table beside the ebony cane and the silver ferrule. Mesdames, messieurs, he began, We shall walk through the events of 2 nights ago, step by step. The little gray cells demand precision. We begin with the supper." He gestured, and the major domo served coffee exactly as he had then, strong, black, in eggshell cups. The prisoners drank under the watchful eyes of the guards. At 11 o'clock, Poirot continued, the storm threatened. Mr. Blaine excused himself to fetch a document from the study, ostensibly the Madeira Company papers. In truth, he intended blackmail. Dona Inez followed him 5 minutes later, ostensibly for a shawl. Dr. Ferreira left to check the barometer in the library. Capitan Silva stepped onto the terrace to smoke. Miss Blaine remained with Dona Leonor. José served the port and vanished. He led them out into the night. The lanterns flickered. The city below was a constellation of lights. They climbed the main stairs to the 3rd terrace, then paused at the entrance to the service stairs. "Here," said Poirot, "the paths diverge. José, you took the service stairs to the kitchen with the empty decanter. You were struck at the lower gate while posting the ferrule. But first," he opened the service door. The narrow stairs spiraled upward, lit by a single bulb. Dona Inez ascended these stairs at 11:12. She carried the cane, its ferrule already removed and hidden by José in his pocket. Mr. Blaine was in the study, searching the desk. She entered silently. They climbed. The study door stood ajar as it had that night. Inside, the desk was arranged exactly as before. The green ledger, the phial of prussic acid, a half-written letter in Blaine's sprawling hand. "My dear Inez, the price is now 50,000 or the ledgers go to the British consul." Poirot positioned Dona Inez behind the desk. "You struck him here, madame, with the cane's silver head. 1 blow, to the temple. He fell across the chair. You dragged him, see the scuff marks on the parquet, to the French window that opens onto the parapet." They moved to the window. The parapet was narrow, the drop sheer. The rain had begun, the tiles gleamed. You heaved him over. He fell 30 feet to the terrace below. Then you descended the main stairs, quickly, for the storm was breaking, and fetched the datura pot from the greenhouse. The key was beneath the 3rd flower pot, as Miss Blaine had placed it. You carried the pot up the service stairs, smashed it upon the corpse, and screamed. Dona Inez's face was marble. "Fantasy." "Fact," said Poirot. "The lace tore as you climbed the parapet to ensure the body was visible. The camellia fell in the struggle. You returned to the sala at 11:19, composed, and joined the others as they rushed upward." He turned to Dr. Ferreira. "You, docteur, were in the library. You heard the scream and delayed 30 seconds, enough to pocket the prussic acid from the desk, knowing it might be traced to your dispensary." Ferreira shrugged. "I heard nothing until the scream." "Yet your shoes, monsieur, are wet to the ankle. You walked the terraces after the rain began, perhaps to establish an alibi with Capitan Silva." The Capitan's scorched face darkened. "I smoked alone." "Alone, yes, but you saw Dona Inez return from the service stairs. You said nothing, hoping to preserve your own share of the fraud." Poirot led them down to the greenhouse. The empty space on the bench gaped like a missing tooth. "Miss Blaine, you discovered the theft at dawn. You said nothing, fearing accusation, but your silence protected the guilty." Miss Blaine's lips thinned. "I protect my plants, not murderers." They returned to the top terrace. Poirot positioned each actor. Blaine's body marked by chalk, the datura shards scattered, the cane upon the desk visible through the open door. Now, the timing. From the sala to the study via the service stairs, 1 minute 40 seconds. The blow, instant. Dragging the body, 2 minutes. Descent to the greenhouse, 1 minute. Return with the pot, 1 minute 30. The scream, timed for 11:19. Total, 7 minutes. Madame was absent exactly that. Donna Inez laughed, a sound like ice cracking. You have no witness. I have, Jose. Poirot beckoned the valet forward. You saw Madame leave the sala. Jose nodded. I was in the pantry corridor. She passed me on the service stairs, carrying the cane. I thought she was returning it to the study. Then I went to post the ferrule. And you, Capitan Silva, saw her return? The Capitan's jaw worked. I saw a woman in black. It was dark. Enough, said Poirot. The lace, the verbena, the timing, the motive, all converge. But one detail remained. The ferrule. Jose hid it with the note. He intended to mail it to me, but Donna Inez followed him, struck him, and retrieved it. In her haste, she dropped the lace and the camellia. He produced the silver ferrule from his pocket. Inside, Dom Vasco's last message. The ink is fresh, written as he died in the Alfama, before the body was moved. Jose witnessed the murder there, helped carry the body in loyalty, then hid the evidence in remorse. Donna Inez lunged suddenly, her handcuffs clinking as she snatched the ferrule. She hurled it toward the parapet, but Poirot was swifter. He caught it neatly. Non, madame, the game is up. The police inspector stepped forward. Inez de Castro, I arrest you for the murders of Dom Vasco de Castro and Reginald Blaine, and for conspiracy to defraud. As she was led away, Donna Inez turned once. You think you have won, little Belgian, but the cork forests are mine by law. The courts will free me. Poirot twirled his mustache. The courts, madame, are logical, like Hercule Poirot. Dr. Ferreira and Capitan Silva were removed in silence. The terraces seemed suddenly larger, the night air cleaner. Donna Leonor approached Poirot. The Estrella do Mar sails at dawn. Will you come to see me off? He bowed. It will be my pleasure, mademoiselle. A captain should begin her voyage with order restored. Miss Blaine closed her notebook. And my datura will be returned, mademoiselle, together with a new pot. Some things are sacred even to murderers. The lanterns guttered in the breeze. Below, the city slept beneath its blanket of saints and candles, unaware that on its highest terraces, justice had walked in patent leather shoes. Chapter 7. The Last Terrace. The Estrella do Mar lay alongside the Quai du Sodré at dawn, her white hull striped with green, her funnels already breathing pale smoke into the rose-gold sky. Gulls wheeled above the masts. The Tagus lapped at the pier with the gentle insistence of a cat at a saucer. Hercule Poirot arrived in a fiacre, his Homburg tilted against the early light, a small leather valise in one hand and a single white camellia in the other. Donna Leonor waited at the foot of the gangway, dressed for the voyage in a coat of navy cashmere and a beret the color of the sea. The violet ribbon was gone. In its place, a narrow scarlet scarf fluttered like a pennant. Beside her stood Jose, his head bandaged but his posture erect, a porter's cap perched above the turban. He carried a wooden crate, stenciled orchids, fragile. You came, she said simply. Mais naturellement, a captain must be seen off by the one who restored her ship. Poirot presented the camellia. For your cabin. It will remind you that even in Brazil, Lisbon's flowers travel. She pinned it to her lapel. The bonds are restored to the safe. The cork forests are under seal. Until the courts decide, Miss Blaine sails with me. She will establish a botanical garden in Bahia. The Estrella is mine by right now. The executors are indisposed. Poirot's eyes twinkled. And Donna Inez. In the prison of São Julião, she has engaged 3 advocates and a confessor. She believes Verbena will mask the scent of defeat. Leonore's smile was sudden, brilliant. But the ledgers are in the captain's cabin, and the combination is changed. The ship's bell rang 8. Passengers streamed aboard, merchants with sample cases, a Jesuit in dusty black, a woman with a parrot in a cage. Poirot walked the deck with Leonore, pointing out the brass telescope in the chart room, the polished wheel that awaited her hand. At the rail, he paused. One last detail, mademoiselle. The prussic acid in the study. Whose was it? Dr. Ferreira's. He kept it for experiments. Inez took it the night Dom Vasco died. She meant it for him if the datura failed. And the datura in the port at supper 2 nights ago? Leonore's eyes widened. There was none. Exactly. A bluff. Donna Inez wished us to believe Dom Vasco was poisoned slowly. In truth, he died of a push and a broken neck. The datura was theater. The hooter sounded deep and mournful. José appeared with the crate. The orchids, Señora Capita, and this. He handed Poirot a small packet wrapped in oilskin. From the safe, Dom Vasco's last gift. Poirot opened it. Inside lay a silver ferrule, not the wolf's head, but a plain one, engraved with the De Castro crest. A note in the same spidery hand. For the little Belgian, a spare in case of accidents. Order above all. V.C. Poirot slipped it into his pocket. Your guardian was a man of foresight. The gangway was raised. Leonore embraced him quickly, the camellia brushing his cheek. Come to Brazil when you tire of Europe. We have hills there too, and mysteries. He watched the Estrella du Mar ease from the pier, her wake a white furrow across the glittering water. The gulls followed, screaming farewells. When the ship was a speck against the horizon, he descended to the quay and summoned another fiacre. At the Avenida Palace, he found a telegram awaiting him. Return immediately. Murder at the British Museum. Bring gray cells. Hastings. Poirot folded the paper with satisfaction. Always the gray cells are in demand, but first. He repaired to the dining room and ordered a café complet and a plate of pasté de nata. The camellia, slightly crushed, he placed in water beside his cup. Outside, Lisbon climbed its 7 hills in the morning light, the jacaranda blossoms drifting like purple snow across the terraces. Somewhere in the prison of São Julião, Donna Inez plotted with her advocates. In the greenhouse of the Casa dos Bicos, Miss Blaine catalogued her poisons. On the high seas, a 19-year-old captain steered toward a new world, with orchids in her cabin and justice in her wake. Poirot raised his coffee in a silent toast. To order, he murmured, and to the little gray cells that preserve it. The camellia nodded in the breeze from the open window, as though in agreement.